Hey everyone, this is Oscar from Underdog, and today we're going to be talking about techno rumbles. Techno rumbles are an essential part of the genre, and they are the thing that fills up the space between kick drums. There are already a million tutorials online about how to do different types of techno rumbles, and I've watched them all. And like some kind of a madman, I've made like a synthesis. I've checked out what are the unifying principles that bind them all together and simplified them for you today. And I've broken it down into 3 levels of skill: basic, intermediate, and master level. The basic will sound something like this. The intermediate will sound something like this. And the master level sounds something like this. Now buckle up, we're about to make some rumbles. Before we go any further, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and consider signing up for one of our classes on underdog.brussels. We're an online music school, not just a YouTube channel. And by the way, we don't only do techno, we do anything that can be labeled electronic music. If you want to sign up for a one-on-one coaching with me, use the link below. Now, let's get into it. Alright, so level 1, the basic rumble. One fundamental concept underlying all of this is that you take yourself a kick drum, you split the audio of the kick drum into 2 parallel channels. On one channel you let through the kick drum unaffected, and on the other channel you affect the kick drum heavily, turning it into a rumble. Then you mix those 2 things back together at the end, and that creates your kick plus rumble group. In Ableton, you do this by creating a kick drum, for instance by making a MIDI channel and programming a kick into it. Then you create a second track, and under the routing options, under the input, you choose the kick drum's channel and you select post effects and you set the monitoring to in. That's what you do. Now the audio of your kick drum is coming through 2 separate channels, and we have the freedom to do whatever we want with this second channel. So here's a little diagram. I told you I had diagrams. So you've got your kick drum and you've split it into what we're going to call the dry chain and the rumble chain. So to make the rumble, you need these 4 elements. First, you need to smear the sound. That means making it less like a dry kick drum. And you want to do this either with delay or reverb, and quite large amounts of both is fine. You can have several different effects stacked in here to create the smear if you want. Then an essential step is to make this mono, because anything like reverb will make it stereo, and we don't want those low frequencies being stereo. We want them all mono. So just a utility, set it to mono, simple. Then we want to low pass it. We only want to keep the low frequency so it sounds like a massive earthquake. Auto filter, super fine for this. Just roll it off and cut everything above maybe 200 Hertz. Check with your ears what matches well with the kick. And then finally you need something to duck this sound, because what we've created here is a long sustained blubbery mess, and you want this to pump in time with the kick somehow. You want it to create a groove, and so you need to pump it. And the simplest way to do it really is to use sidechain compression, because that's already built into Ableton and it's easy to do. You sidechain it to the dry kick, and that way you have the kick loud and then the rumble loud, and they alternate with each other. You'll want to pay attention to the attack and release timings to make sure that it grooves along with the kick drum at the speed that you want. Alternatively, I highly recommend LFO tool for this, because then you don't have to worry about the kick being the trigger and all these complicated things. You can shape the exact curve of the rumble. Highly recommended. Here's an audio example of the basic kick without the rumble. It's already quite a beefy one. Huh? Then I'll deactivate all the rumble effects and listen just to the rumble. Right now it sounds just the same as the kick, so let's smear it first. Then let's mono it. Then let's low pass it. Then let's sidechain compress it. We've got quite a bit of makeup gain as well to bring it up to the right volume level, and then together with the kick. And they go together into a group. And that was the basic rumble formula. The 2 extra levels are expansions of that. Let's have a look at level 2, the intermediate level. So here we are, we're back at the same diagram, still just two chains, a dry chain and a rumble chain. But we're adding in a few extra elements that give us a bit more control over shaping the tonality of the sound, specifically some saturation, some equalization, and some limiting. You can see them on this diagram. So saturation, what does that mean? Well, saturation takes any dark sound and generates harmonics from it and basically makes it brighter. Some gentle saturation will just subtly shift the sound from emphasizing the lows to emphasizing the highs a little bit. But especially in techno, we can go for heavy saturation, which introduces crackling and distortion into the sound. It sounds like your speakers are breaking, and that's kind of a psychoacoustic thing that we want to achieve to make it feel loud. If your rumble has distortion built into it, it feels like your kick is so big that the speakers can barely handle it to reproduce it. And that's an aesthetic effect that we want. To saturate it, any saturator will do. Choose your favorite one. Have some fun exploring different saturation plugins. But some good examples are Ableton's stock saturator. It's really not bad. There's also the drum bus with the crunch function. Really nice. Or the Eternal Classic Decapitator. Always great. Now we can do the saturation once the sound has been smeared. And we can also do it again on the group, which means that the kick and the rumble will be going through the same processing, gluing them together further. Also, saturation rolls off a little bit of dynamic range, making your entire signal beefier, louder, and with less transients. Then, a very common thing that happens there is that you get a buildup of frequencies in the low mids. Your kick already has some frequencies there, your rumble has a lot of frequencies there, and when they build up too much, they can sound congested. So, experiment with at various places, especially right after saturation, cutting a little bit in the low mids. Just drag the EQ bell curve around a little bit and listen to that. Don't high pass stuff. That's not the goal. You're just trying to clear up a little bit of the low mids, which makes things feel less congested. Then at the end of the signal chain, it might be a good idea to put a limiter on there to shave off just a few decibels, just maybe 1 or 2 decibels. This allows, again, your signal to feel louder and punchier. Let's have a look at an example. Okay, so for the intermediate one, we're using the same kick. Check this out. All right, then the rumble. We start with the same signal chain, except we're gonna add a second smearing option. So we're gonna add the delay, which is gonna move at 2/16 notes, which means it's gonna emphasize the upbeats instead of the downbeats. Check this out. Then we're gonna saturate it, give it a little bit more body. The auto filter is right there. Then we're gonna equalize out a little bit of the low mids. And that's it. That's the rumble, together with the kick. Now, on the group, we're gonna put on the drum bus, some saturation. Then we're gonna cut out some low mids and limit a little bit. Now, all these little changes together, compared to the basic level, a lot more beef, much more assertive. And so that was the intermediate level. This is the point at which you have a pretty assertive, pretty confident rumble going on, and this can already serve as the basis for a track. But if you click the video called Techno Rumble Mastery, you're not just content with the intermediate level rumble. Let's take this to the master level. At the master level, I want you to think not just as a producer who's making a kick plus a rumble. What I want you to think of is like you're making a sound sculpture. You're creating this sculpture around your kick drum that has many, many different layers, and they're all pulsating and grooving together, and they're well balanced and they're nuanced, and there's ear candy, and there's a lot going on. So let's think about how we can expand this to create a sound sculpture. Boom. Okay, so our dry chain stays the same. Our rumble chain stays the same. We already have a pretty good low end rumble. What we want now is texture and nuance in the highs. And there's a couple of different layers that we can add to achieve that. First of all, there is another chain coming off from the kick, which is just like the rumble chain, except we're not going to low pass it. We're going to band pass it at some other point of the frequency spectrum, like around 800 Hertz or 1000 Hertz or something. And we're going to mix it in very low. This is going to give some air and some crackly texture to the entire thing. Let me show you that before we continue. So the basic formula here that will be similar to the intermediary sounds like this. Now, we've created a third chain here called the texture chain. And this is what it sounds like. It's got smearing. So we've got 2 delays and a reverb. And what do we do here? Oh, we're monoing it, which is not even necessary. Then we've got a saturator to create some grit. And then we're band passing only the mids. I don't want the ultra highs, I don't want the ultra lows. This is something that is pumping in the background. And here's an LFO tool as well, which is just creating some movement. It's not cutting it the whole way, it's just creating some pumping movement. So then together with the kick and the rumble, it feels like there's more going on. It feels like there's more ear candy. Now, within the same kick plus rumble group, we can add a few more elements, and 2 particular ones that come back all the time. One is percussion, low-level percussion, either a single hit every now and then or a full loop. Mixed in quite low, it gives grit, texture, and groove to the entire thing. You can then also smear it, saturate it, equalize it, and duck it so that it gets out of the way of the kick. It doesn't mess with the clarity of the kick. It's mixed in low enough, but it gives more depth and nuance to the whole thing. A small example here is this, which is just a low tom put through some reverb, a decapitator, and mixed in because here I felt it kind of complemented the groove. So together it sounds like. It's subtle, but it gives the whole thing a bit more movement. And it also goes into the same group, so it's going to be affected by the bus processing the same way as the others. Now, the last element is the atmospheric element. That is usually some kind of sustained, maybe a frozen reverb sound or something like that. Let me show you what that might sound like. So I take myself any sound. In this case, I took myself a clap and I put it through a reverb, and then I'm going to hit freeze, which is going to create a certain kind of sustained texture. Check this out. There we go. It's now frozen. Only the high frequencies are maintained, and it's pumping a little bit with the LFO tool. And together, now there's an awful lot going on here. And we haven't even added any more fancy stuff to the bus, which we can do and we will do. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some parallel effects. Check this out. What you do is you make yourself an effect rack. Within the effect rack, you create a dry chain, and then you can create several secondary chains, like for instance, a saturation chain. You saturate the heck out of it and only keep those frequencies that you like. So listen to just this one. So this is the dry one. That's the saturation one, which just gives crunch and grit in the high end. And then I've even added one for width, which has a delay that moves a little bit in stereo, but this is not really even essential. Altogether, this gets cut in the low mids again and goes into a limiter. Listen to the global effect of what all these small changes do compared to the previous versions. So we go from the basic level to the intermediate level to the mastery level. You can add as many layers of texture as you want, as long as you make sure that you EQ out the lows, maybe the low mids, and the ultra highs as well, so that they don't get overwhelming. And then you can mix it in quite quietly and keep it moving around the kick drum. Now, some finishing touches that are super important. The cool thing about this entire setup is that you can copy paste it across, replace the kick drum with a different kick drum, and see what happens. Sometimes the whole thing falls apart because after all, you've created a sculpture around that particular kick drum that you've been working on. Sometimes you get pleasant surprises, and sometimes it just works as a template that you can deactivate everything and start to reactivate everything, tweaking the parameters to create an entirely new sculpture, but following the same principles, the same algorithm, the same concepts. As an example, I've done a few alternate mastery versions here. Let's listen to them. And it's always cool to listen to them in context. So let me show you with a hi-hat and a synthesizer what they would sound like. Every version is slightly different, has a slightly different character, and could serve as the starting point for an entire track. Now, congratulations, you've reached the mastery level. However, to be able to operate at the mastery level, there's a few things you need to pay attention to. First of all, in order to move from this to an actually finished track, you probably want to resample all of these layers so that you can choose when they start and stop. Because when I hit play right now, the kick starts dry and then all the secondary delays start moving. So the very first kick or two doesn't actually sound like the rest of the groove. So you probably want to resample that and loop only a section of the textures which are grooving in the right way. That way you can cut that audio at the right times in your track and you don't have these decay tails as well going on. Second point you need to pay attention to is that you have tonal balance. This is really hard and it's really hard to hear sometimes. Having a lot of large warm frequencies sounds good while you're producing and you're tempted to add more and more low frequencies. However, then when you switch to a professional track, you'll realize that it's not that dark actually. It has low frequencies, but it's usually not mixed with an emphasis on the super low frequencies. So you need to figure out how to ensure that there's tonal balance, that there's high information and low information in the right balance. I'll do a separate video on monitoring, but realize that how you're listening to the music is affecting your perception of it. So your speakers will be lying to you, your room will be lying to you, your headphones will be lying to you, all in different ways. And you need to figure out where the truth lies between those different lies. If I could go back 10 years, my biggest advice to myself as a producer would be to get a subwoofer. Otherwise, you can't even hear those sub-frequencies that you're trying to shape, and to get Sonarworks. I didn't even believe in it at first, but it has changed my mixing life. So I'm not going to get further into that right now. It's for a different video. But the last philosophical tip I want to give you on this is to focus on the groove. Remember that your kick is the lead actor here. It's the main element. Everything else is a supporting actor for the kick. So make sure that the extra elements that add groove don't pull away from the groove of the kick, that everything pulsates together as one unit. Depending also on what speed you're producing at, there may be more or less room for emphasis on the rumble. If the BPM of your production is relatively slow, there's a lot of space between kicks to fill up with rumble. If your BPM is really high, there's not that much space for rumble. So don't overthink this either. The slower your BPM, the more space there is for syncopation in between the notes. The faster your BPM, usually the straighter your groove is, so there's less space for syncopation in the rumble. I hope you like my little diagrams here. I'm gonna make a little poster out of this so you can print this at home, hang it up in your bedroom. If you do, send me a photo. I would like to see that. The Underdog Techno Rumble Master Chart. Share your work with me in the Discord, join our Discord, and let me know what kind of styles or artists you'd like to see a tutorial on next. Check out one of the other techno production videos here. Stay producing, be good to one another, and bye-bye.